Good afternoon or good morning if you happen to be on the West Coast, and welcome to today's webinar entitled, You Really Can't Run an Intelligent Enterprise on Email, Phone, and Paper. How to Leverage the SAP Supplier Digital Network. My name is Rihanna Thompson, and I will be your moderator for today. We have just a few announcements before we begin today's presentation. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our presenters. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them out into the Q&A. However, in the interest of time, we will try to get to all questions during our Q&A session at the end. We will hopefully have time for everyone. With that being said, I'd like to take the time to introduce our speakers for today. From Illumiti, we have Sean House, Senior Director of Solution Architecture. From Accelerated S2P, we have Dan Powell, Solution Consultant, and Bob Kane, Director of Transformation and Strategy. On the agenda for today, we've already taken care of one thing by introducing our speakers. We will also be going into a brief intro from Illumiti and an overview of the Accelerated S2P. We'll then be diving into a demo of the Digital Supplier Network, and then we'll go into how do you drive value with the network, and go into next steps with the supplier portal, and then capping off today's presentation with our Q&A session.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rihanna. Illumiti's ECC and S4 customers are often challenged to find cost-effective e-procurement, B2B, and portal solutions. They're often managing complex integrations to a portfolio of products, or they're actually doing without. SAP has positioned Ariba and the SAP Digital Supplier Network to meet many of these business requirements, and Illumiti recognizes the value of this offering to our clients. To that end, Illumiti is partnering with another SAP partner, Accelerated Source to Pay, to offer these SAP solutions to our ERP client base. Accelerated S2P brings significant implementation experience and intellectual property to help reduce overall implementation costs and timeline. I'd like to introduce Dan Powell from Accelerated S2P, who will elaborate further on what is possible.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Powell. I'm with Accelerated Source to Pay. I'm a senior solution consultant, and my role today in the conversation is to really guide us through a demonstration. We're going to focus on creating a purchase order within the SAP system, taking that out through the supplier portal, give you the view from the supplier and how that comes back today. So our whole focus is going to be on the portal a little bit, just quickly, so that you understand who Accelerated Source to Pay is. We're actually headquartered out of the UK. And while we are going to talk a little bit, and some of the thinking might be around the technology and the implementation, that's really just a small part of what we do. The larger picture is really on the services and the advisory side to make sure when you're leveraging the tool sets, you're getting the most advantage and return out of that investment that you're making. Organization, we have offices based in the US, we have Australia, we have several offices in the Czech Republic as well with our own Center of Excellence. With this, we have over 120 consultants within the organization globally, and we have partnerships with other organizations such as Vivo Consulting for Latin America, and of course, Intelligence as well. With that, in our work, we've been able to win several awards over the past few years. For 2017 and 18, we've actually been named the EMEA Innovation Partner of the Year. We've actually won an award as well in the APAC region last year. And for 2019, we were actually able to capture the SAP Pinnacle Award that's awarded for our work in the mid-markets. So any of those companies that might have spend under the $500 million mark, for our understanding of how those organizations work. Now, that being said, we take that same practice and we leverage that within the enterprise organizations as well. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about is, as we have our purchase order process today in the digital world, we're going to take a look and moving that into making sure it's fully digital back to the supplier, where the supplier can send invoices back as well to be digital. That ensures for accuracy. It ensures for lower cost on touch. We're going to do this by leveraging the Ariba Supplier Network. So far today, there's over $3 trillion have transferred through this Ariba network. So if you add up all of the transactions through Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, they still don't compare to what the Ariba network, what the supplier portal is leveraging today. So we have over 4.1 million organizations or companies that are using this portal for transactions. And as you can see, over 76% of the Fortune 500 companies. So this is nothing new, it's nothing unusual. This is something that when we start talking about your supplier base, most of your suppliers are going to be very familiar with this supplier portal. So as we run through our demonstration today, we're really going to focus a little bit on this part here for the first phase. So we're going to take the role of the buyer in the SAP ERP. I'll be in S/4HANA. I'm going to show you a purchase order that's been created. We're going to send that through the portal, and we're going to show you the supplier's interaction within the portal. The supplier is going to confirm that order, send it back into the ERP. We'll show you how that looks on the ERP. The supplier will then generate the advanced ship noticement. That'll send back. Again, we'll show you that on the ERP. We've gone ahead and staged the goods receipt. So then we'll show the supplier submitting the invoice, how that shows. And the goal here is, understanding most of the folks on the call today have an understanding of the SAP process to create purchase order and invoicing. If you have questions about that, we can certainly entertain those in further discussion to elaborate in more detail. But today we're going to focus mostly on this portal aspect of things. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the demonstration part that we have lined up for you. So for this, you can see we've set this up. We have our purchase order set up here in the system. So from our purchase order, we're going to come through, we'll take a look and see that the purchase order has actually been sent over to the Ariba network. Then when we come into the Ariba network, so at this point, we're in the supplier role. This is the supplier portal that they're going to leverage, and you can see our purchase order that we've created and sent down. We're going to go ahead and click into the purchase order, and you'll be able to see the details. This will be all the information that came through from the SAP system, right? You'll be able to scroll down to see all of the information that's relevant. And from here, you'll be able to confirm the order. Now, we could confirm the entire order, just individual lines, or reject it. For the sake of discussion today, we're going to go ahead with a simple process to confirm the entire order. So with that, it's going to ask for some basic information, confirmation number, and a delivery date. From here, we'll go ahead and select next, and then we'll be able to submit this. Once this gets submitted back, we'll be able to go back into the S4 ERP. So from here, we can see we're back as the buyer. Here's where I've created my initial requisition. You can see it's come back in, the page has been refreshed, and you can see here we have our order confirmation here in the confirmations tab. You'll also be able to see we've brought over the anticipated delivery date. Now, as we come back in as a supplier, we're going to create our ASN, our shipping notification. And you can see there are some asterisks for required fields, such as the packing slip ID. So we'll go ahead and enter our ID. You can also see we have the ability to put in any carriers such as FedEx, DHL. The system will prompt you for additional information such as tracking orders, tracking IDs, as well as when you'll be able to see that tracking information. And of course, it's going to require us to put in a delivery date for our ship notification. There are additional details that we could populate. Again, we'll take the simple path for conversation today in regards to volume and everything else that can be shipped through. We'll go ahead and select next. It'll give us an opportunity to review, and then we can submit. So now what happens, this gets sent back into the ERP. You can see our purchase order status is shipped, so that the supplier can see that. And now when we come back, we're of course our buyer or our requisitioner. We can see here in the system, we have our ASN, and we have our delivery date. From here, we've gone in, as I mentioned, we've staged with the goods receipt. So we have our goods receipt here in the system where you can see this in the order history for the 2,000 units that we're requesting. Now we come back as a supplier, right, into the portal again to take a look at this. we can see our status has changed to ship, and now we can create our invoice. So you'll see in the system, in this portal, the supplier can create a credit memo. They can do line item debits as well. Again, for the sake of simplicity, we'll take a standard invoice. So we'll fill in our required fields. And as we're doing this, you'll see we have the ability for tax at the header and the line level, as well as we can do header and line level shipping as well. The invoice is going to automatically populate with the information from the purchase order so that all of the accounting will remain for your suppliers. You can go ahead and select next. We'll have an opportunity to review the order, or the invoice, I'm sorry. And from here we can submit. So now we'll go in, we'll quickly take a look at the invoice and the order history so that you can see that. Here from the home page, we'll click into the purchase order. You can see on the right-hand side, the purchase order has been invoiced. And you can see down below that the routing status has been acknowledged. And we have our confirmation, our ASN, and our invoice as well. Now we come back as our buyer into the system. We can see our invoice number that comes through. And from here, we can see all of our invoice detail as well. So with that, we'll jump over a little bit to go back. So with this process, we've been able to take a look. We've seen the purchase order come in as a buyer in ERP through the portal. We've been able to see that the supplier can take that purchase order, confirm the order, send it back through the portal to the buyer's ERP, right? Ship notifications get sent back and communicated, and the invoice as well. In a little bit, I'll show you the remittance as well, when you can see that the invoice has been paid also. So this is going to be that's the high level view. So now what we'll do is we'll spend a few moments just going through a little bit more detail about the power of this portal. So the power of this portal really gives us a lot better ability to collaborate with our suppliers. We can work with them on quoting objects as well as purchase orders and invoices. We can take a look on how we can look at efficiencies to streamline that process so that they're clean and they can run as quickly as possible. We'll be able to talk a little bit about rules so that there are certain invoices that you might not need to have AP process until they get addressed on the supplier side. So we'll talk for a few minutes about that. And the thing I do want to make sure is as we look at this portal and the power of this portal, there are going to be a lot of your suppliers, such as your large MRO, your Amazons, your Grangers of the world, that are going to actually take their system and they'll integrate their system with the supplier portal, which then of course integrates back into your system. And what happens then is those two systems can begin to talk and interact in real time for better collaboration. So with that, let's spend a couple of minutes to talk about how purchase orders might come through from an invoicing aspect. So if you look, when a purchase order gets sent from ERP, the purchase order can come in several different forms. I'll show you the purchase order in the portal as well. And of course, for our integrated suppliers, it's going to show up in their ERP, but your suppliers will have the ability to receive purchase orders through an email such as this. That purchase order will be sent as an attachment that they can then download and save wherever they may need to save a hard copy, right? And they can come through and process that order as well. So if I come in and copy the link, I can come down as that supplier and bring it in, and it'll automatically open up and bring me into that supplier's purchase order where I can go through that process to confirm and create that ship notification. So again, we want to make this very easy back for the suppliers as well. So when we come here, we'll take a look at the supplier portal for a few moments. There are some great reporting options within this portal that your clients will be able to use. You can see there's a header that'll give them the purchase order by amount so they can get an idea of the type of volumes that they're able to see. They have a quick, easy view to see the number of new purchase orders they might have, the number of orders that they need to ship, and they can begin to manage this queue a little bit easier for them as well. So from here, as a supplier, we talked a little bit about collaboration. So when I come in, I can be sent an opportunity for an RFQ, for example, and it'll generate a collaboration request. These come through and get sent out to the supplier. The supplier can click into these and decide whether or not they want to respond or not. This particular collaboration request, they looked for a proposal. The supplier said, yes, I can do this. It's been responded, and they've actually gone through and issued a purchase order on behalf of this. So this is just yet another way you can begin to collaborate with your suppliers. So the other side is we'll spend a little bit of time talking about invoices. So when we take a look at some of the invoices, for example, we can come through and see that we have some of these invoices that might be rejected. So if I click into a rejected invoice, and there are a number of reasons that an invoice might be rejected, and these are rules that you can set up on your side so that if an invoice doesn't fit certain criteria, you can prevent that supplier from submitting the invoice. Those criteria could be using the same invoice ID. It could be that you'll allow a tolerance of up to 10% of the items that are purchased. So for example, if you purchased a quantity of 100 and the supplier ships 109, maybe you decide to accept that. If they ship 112 and they exceed a 10% threshold, you can reject that invoice so that supplier has to contact someone and resubmit. If a supplier sees this, there are of course email notifications of it as well. They can come into the system, take a look at this and see there's a header level exception. There's some issues with this. As a supplier, we can edit this invoice. We can take a look and it's going to tell us here on the screen where the problems are in red. So it's going to tell me that this invoice ID already exists. So if I come in and change this to a unique invoice number for this particular supplier, it's going to tell me the invoice date can't be in the past, so I'll need to reissue the invoice. Come through here, and from here I'll look through. I don't have any errors at the moment, and I'll go ahead and select update and next. And now you can see as I scroll up, it did not submit. I have a note up at the top to correct the errors. And what it's telling me is I need to have a % for my payment terms, and I need to enter an email address as well. So now I can go through and submit the invoice. I'll submit the invoice. Click on done. And you'll see I've created a new invoice here with the new DP01 at the end of this invoice. And you can see it's been put into the queue to go back to the supplier portal, and the supplier's waiting to acknowledge it on their side. So what this does is it allows your suppliers to have the ability to manage their invoice queue so that they can get clean invoices back into AP so that it can work with those. Okay. So now we'll take a look. We can take a look at an invoice that's been sent, for example, one of the acknowledged invoices. Just real quickly, we'll take a look. This is our invoice. We saw this earlier. Every document, so a document being an advanced ship notification, order confirmation, or an invoice, every document within this portal has a history tab. So in the history tab, anyone can come in and see what's going on with that particular order. So in this one, you can see that it has been received, right? And you can see that it's being updated and processed by the buyer, in this case, our accelerated sourcing STP test solution. So you begin to give your suppliers more insight into that aspect. Suppliers will have the ability to search on their invoices. So if we come in and take a look at some of our status, and we want to click into an approved invoice, this is going to be an invoice that has gone through the system that your suppliers have looked at and they've approved. So what this does is now we start sending invoice status back to the portal so that your suppliers can know where does their invoice stand? Is it being reconciled? Has it been approved and you're just waiting for the agent? And the goal here is it can reduce the number of calls to your AP team where your suppliers are calling you to say, do you have an update on the status of my invoice? You can also see over in the reference tab, I have the ability to take a look at both non-purchase order invoices and PO invoices. Because a lot of you will have suppliers that may not necessarily transact with you through purchase orders. This network will definitely support non-PO invoices to account for those suppliers as well. The only difference, it will not automatically populate those line items. The supplier will need to go in and create those line items. But again, I can come into these invoices, see that it's been approved, and again, I have the history. If I'm a supplier that routinely has the same type of services that I may provide, where I would need to invoice you on a regular basis, I could come in and simply copy the invoice, right? This makes it easy for the supplier to take an invoice that's been approved or an invoice that's been paid, right? Copy all of that information, change the appropriate invoice number and date, and resubmit. This could be a scenario for maintenance, for example, or any recurring invoice that might happen. Suppliers also have the ability to set up some of those recurring invoices where the amounts don't change to automatically self-invoice. That's a further discussion that we can get into after the call. And the last status that I want to spend a couple minutes with is to talk a little bit about the paid invoices. So here we can look, and our suppliers have an opportunity to see, has my invoice been paid? So once the ERP runs their payment, creates their payment run, it'll send information back out with the remittance information to the tool so that you can see where that resides. And you can see, in this particular scenario where I had purchase order and non-purchase order, these particular invoices happen to reference a contract. So not only can the system work with PO, non-PO type of invoices, if you're working with the contracts module as well, you can leverage some of the contract invoicing also. Again, a little bit more details. We can certainly go into more conversation in regards to that. So, from here, we have our ability to see our history. We can see that the invoice has been paid, right, from this process. So with that, right, hopefully we've talked a little bit today, and you can see a little bit how through the supplier portal, not only do we allow for some better collaboration through order confirmations and ship notifications, we also have the ability for quotes as well to simplify and streamline that process. We can take a look at that on how do we get to clean invoices. Our suppliers are going to know the invoice status. If it's been rejected, they'll be able to edit and resubmit the invoice. You can put controls onto the system as to what you're going to require and not. For example, you saw that I was prompted, I needed to enter a percentage for our payment terms. You can put those types of controls into what you're going to allow and what you're not, and you can set thresholds for above and below those amounts. So again, you have more control so that your AP team has better invoices to work and process and reconcile when they're running through this organization. And of course, I want to come back and make sure I reiterate all of the power of the supplier portal, the few minutes that we've spent in there for your fully integrated suppliers, like I mentioned, your Grangers of the world, your Amazons, your Office Max, those suppliers will integrate their back end into the system for a seamless flow of this information so that they'll still have all of this great information. They'll certainly have access to the portal if they have a desire to go into the portal to see that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to my coworker, Bob Kane.
My name is Bob Kane. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time, everybody, for joining today. My name is Bob Kane. I am the Director of Transformation and Strategy at Accelerated Source to Pay. And now that Dan's shown us how the portal works, I want to spend some time talking about what the typical business problems are that we're going to solve, and kind of some of the power and the value behind the portal. So the goal of the portal, right, is around the portal and the digital network is to have a tool set that allow the business to transform and leverage automation and digitization, right? So a lot of businesses are still doing things from an analog standpoint where things are error prone. There's higher costs around it, right? Transactions with suppliers via emails, phone calls, faxes, lots of paperwork, lots of invoices, trying to keep track of all of that paper. it can have a huge impact on the accounts payable department and efficiencies within that organization. Also, it'll have, you've got phone calls from suppliers asking for statuses, suppliers not receiving materials and purchase orders. And there's a lot of uncertainty around things like when things will be delivered, all of those, when things will be delivered, whether someone got the order, etc. In addition to, there can be extensive point-to-point EDI integrations, those types of operational decisions. So in that world, moving to a digital world where in as little as 7 to 16 weeks, able to get into a more accurate, low-cost, and data-rich environment, leveraging your SAP environment and the investment that you've already made in that, reducing noise and effort within accounts payable to ensure that that's happening efficiently and frictionless, and making sure that the suppliers are receiving their purchase orders and that they're able to communicate that information effectively. And also that it's a scalable and flexible solution, as Dan mentioned, right? Your ability to ensure that you have your rules and your tolerances in place, that you can be able to navigate and accommodate the entire supply base. And then lastly, being able to leverage early payment discounts. So within this, right, there's three main drivers behind this. And as I mentioned, the digital transactions, making sure that those are frictionless and seamless, so that your information can be with your supply base and that you can have visibility into how they're interacting with your orders. The end result is it ends in a reduced cost to manage all of those processes. And then ultimately a speedier return on your investment, and have a end-to-end process transformation that allows the total cost of ownership to really be driven down. The reason why we know that this works is because we've got, it's based on the Ariba network, which has over 4 million suppliers and $3 trillion in spend annually. As Dan mentioned, as you went through the process, right, this is around getting the digitization and automation for POs out to the suppliers, being able to bring that back into having the PO with the PO confirmation coming back in, along with the advanced shipping notices. By automating these transactions, you really have the opportunity to provide a clear way for information within the purchase order, allowing them to plan better and for you to plan better on when you'll be receiving those goods and services. And within the items being shipped, it's really around having the invoice being able to be generated by the supplier, ensuring PO compliance, which can be a significant saving. And speaking of the receiving piece of that, there also is the ability to have electronic receipt settlement, or ERS. By digitizing the PO and allowing the supplier to be able to provide the items for the receipt and the invoice, and be able to provide that in a consolidated and efficient and electronic manner, that ERS process can be streamlined even further. And that's definitely something we can talk about in more detail if that's something that you currently use, or is something that you would be interested in leveraging. That's really around making sure that the receipts are done in a way that the receiving, invoicing, all kind of are leveraged together. And once that invoice is matched against that order, making sure that, right, we've got it based on your rules and your controls, and having that remittance information really coming down to back to the supplier so that they can see that information. But by automating this, in addition to some of the things that Dan mentioned, it also eliminates lost invoices, late invoices, lost POs, right, the emails going back and forth. It really is, by having it digitized, it allows for that those inefficiency that comes through the paper process to be eliminated or reduced greatly. So our overall approach to drive success around this comes down to supplier adoption. A lot of the supplier adoption is driven from the suppliers that are on the agreement network currently, on the Digital Supplier Network. So on that network, over 4 million suppliers, and the base of that, as Dan had mentioned, that's larger than the largest business network that's in existence. And to be able to leverage that, though, it's great that they're on there, right? It's really around how do we take your supply base, being able to match that up against this supply base that's on there, creating a strategy for execution that allows you to be able to capture that and be able to leverage what is on the network and what isn't on the network, be able to have a plan to engage those suppliers, communicate with them, and help them be able to go with you on the transformation journey of digitization. In addition to having a strategy and execution, it was around visibility, being able to see what suppliers are automated within and what step you are at within that automation, and being able to see what the value that you are getting out of that automation. And so that clear visibility for the tool set there. So with those suppliers, though, we understand that they are your suppliers and that you have a partnership with them. And for your suppliers to be able to find value within this, the important thing for them, right, for better collaboration, so that they can anticipate and fulfill your orders. Also, transactional efficiencies for their side, understanding that they are able to submit invoices with confidence that allows them to be able to get paid on time. And then having visibility to be able to see what the status is of those invoices that Dan demonstrated, and making sure that they understand not just when they'll get paid, but also for what they're getting paid. That allows for a lot more efficient accounts receivable side for them. That really lends towards that partnership that you're trying to build with those suppliers. And then also, as suppliers that have the technology and want to have a fully integrated system, they're able to integrate that via the portal, so that they can create an end-to-end fully automated process within their environment. So it's not just about you becoming transformed into digitization, but also having your suppliers come along on that journey, and for them to go through transformation also to help create a more efficient system for both them and for you. So the value that you see within this, right? You have your accounts payable efficiencies that you typically see 15 to 25%. So these would be the value that you're able to get by digitizing the accounts payable process through invoice collaboration, invoice verification. And then also order efficiency, making sure that as you're leveraging your ERP system to create those purchase orders already, making sure that those are getting out to the suppliers, and being able to fully leverage those, and having that automation. Typically, you can see a reduction of 10 to 20% in cost. The next area that we see for value within this is working capital. Making sure that you've got stock management and replenishment, making sure that you have, right, the capital that you're laying out for inventory, understanding what your suppliers are able to leverage and be able to provide that additional, in addition to that, your DPO, your days payable outstanding, making sure that you're getting invoices approved, and then leveraging early payment discounts. So right, this can have a substantial impact to your bottom line. These are discounts that typically you've already negotiated. Having this process in which you can actually achieve those can have a dramatic impact on the business. And then the last part around data visibility. So by digitizing and by automating this, not only is your supplier able to see the orders and see what information is coming to them, but you're able to have better visibility on the Digital Supplier Network to see what orders are being sent and how they're being transmitted, being able to have all of that insight so that you can really leverage that and the impact that that has on cash around on the cash on hand, and your opportunities within that. And then also the cost of going and trying to achieve that data visibility without a digitized tool, that can be a rather expensive cost. So an example that we have, this is an example of a project that we've approached, and so seeing some typical things within an organization, right? So we've got the ECC or S4 that's going into the supplier portal and making sure that you've got collaboration without complexity to your suppliers so you can capture the discounts. And what we've seen is, right, typically 15 or more employees are tied up in a typical invoicing process. 63% of the accounts payable function is around duplication of invoices. So being able to eliminate that duplication, right, so that you can actually focus on the invoices that are payable. And that's typically because, right, suppliers don't have visibility, so they keep sending invoices in. You're able to see things like suppliers where they're chasing payment status, so the amount of time that accounts payable functions and users and business stakeholders are spending answering the phone, trying to identify what's the current status of their invoices, where are they at, when do they expect to be paid, are they approved, right? Being able to eliminate that and allow the supplier to have that confidence that not only did they submit an invoice that's payable, but visibility as to what the status of that invoice is. And then also not only being able to achieve early payment discounts, but also avoiding any late fees for payment. So as you see the invoice count, right, dropping down because you're not getting the duplication, you can see a large reduction in costs, including and also a increase in productivity, right? Being able to, it's not just about being able to do those things with less, but also being able to do more things that aren't being done and they're being sacrificed because you're trying to manage that manual process today. DPO has a significant impact within it, and then a net ROI, typically less than 12 months to be able to go for the digital supplier network, having that implemented and having an ROI within the efficiencies of the ordering process, efficiencies of visibility for where your transactions are, and also being able to see the supplier being able to submit that invoice in a payable fashion. And this is, so from a technology standpoint, this is based on a tried and true method of CIG integration, which is the Ariba-based cloud integration gateway. That it has very quick implementation that allows the standard fields within SAP and the standard fields within the Ariba network to fully be able to be integrated so that information can flow back and forth freely. And then, as Dan mentioned, on the network, being able to, in addition to the integration, being able to leverage rules out there to ensure that you have the right information coming back. And this works for not just ECC, but it also works for, or I'm sorry, not just S4, it also works for ECC. And it's definitely something that I know we've implemented several times to be able to effectively do that. And so as I know we're rounding time out here, I want to talk just for a moment around some next steps. So if this is something that you would be able to leverage, if you can see the value in this or would like to have a further conversation around what that might look like for you, for us, I think helping to attain a reasonable and achievable business case that starts with a base questionnaire to understand kind of what your volumes are, what your pain points are, to make sure that we're solving for the right piece, and then being able to create a very detailed project, a very detailed business case that allows you to be able to ascertain over time what that return on investment would specifically be, and then being able to summarize that back up and being able to provide this to you so that you can have a consumable product to be able to get approval for budgets and those types of things. In addition to the detailed business case that we think is fundamental to a process like this, we also would want to go through that supplier match that I mentioned earlier to make sure that we've got how many suppliers are already on the network and what you'll be able to leverage. In addition to that, making sure that you have a clear plan for that strategy and execution. And as I mentioned, it's all about achievability, and it's not just about creating an automated process for automation's sake, but it's really making sure that we've got a very clear way to be able to have that information visible and measurable, so that you can ensure that the ROI that you intend to receive from this process is something that's very achievable. And with that, let me turn this back over to Brianna and see if there are any questions that we have at this point.
Thanks, Bob. And we do have a few questions that are starting to come in. I'd like to give everyone a moment to send in any more questions that they would have for Sean, Dan, or Bob today. But with that being said, as everyone begins typing in their questions, let's start off with the first one. Would all of our suppliers be required to use the portal to generate invoices? Free for all. Anyone can jump in.
This is Dan. I'll take that. So it's not required that all of your suppliers leverage the portal, right? You're always going to have your one-off suppliers that might send one or two invoices, a quarter or a month, right? It's really, and we need to be able to account for that. The goal is, when we go through an enablement, is to take a look at your high volume suppliers. There are certainly options, right, for your small suppliers. We want to encourage them to use the portal so that they can get it in. It will allow their invoices to get processed quickly. It'll allow, which in turn allows them to get paid a little quicker as well. It's certainly not a mandatory. That's going to come into a compliance policy that, as you deploy this, that you'll want to take into account. You might decide that you have your own policy that says, if the supplier is going to be invoicing us more than once a month, we really need to push them into the portal. That comes into some of the change management and the deployment and kind of your policies as we deploy this. Certainly not absolutely mandatory, but we really want to encourage your suppliers to use the portal. There's no cost for them to use the portal. It's pretty seamless and easy for them to use, as you saw. Great question, though.
Okay. The next question's for you, Bob. What if I already have an invoice automation? Is there benefits for using the portal instead? I guess it kind of continues off the first question from Dan.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in addition to, as Dan mentioned, right, so not only if your suppliers aren't there and there's not just purchase orders, but if you already have the invoicing piece of this, there's still a lot of value in getting the orders over to the supplier, the PO confirmation, and the advance entry notices. There can be substantial value within that. And then we would want to look at the invoicing process that you have right now and whether or not we can use the Digital Supplier Network to be able to feed into that invoicing process that you currently have to allow that current process to be improved even more. But yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Second question is for you too, is again for you, Bob. I'm a company and I have a lot of small companies that provide services to me. Is it worth the effort to implement the supplier portal?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. There's a lot of value, even in smaller transactions, as Dan was mentioning. Part of it is it can be a compliance issue, but also even the smaller suppliers can get a lot of value out of having a single place for them to have invoices. So not just for you, but also for that supplier to really help build those out, right? We know the fragility of the economy and small suppliers, being able to give them visibility to those transactions and allowing them to be more efficient, and for them to make sure that they have an invoice that is payable sent in is really valuable to them, right? They know that they're going to get paid. They're able to have that visibility. So absolutely, there's a lot of value in doing that for your tail end suppliers.
Okay. The next question is for you, Dan. Most of our supplier spend today is against contracts without a PO. Would it be relevant for our organization?
Definitely sensing a bit of a theme. So this is a good question. Absolutely, it's relevant, right? Similar to the points Bob was making, right? So, and when I went through this, you saw we had some of those purchase orders come against the contract. That's valuable for a number of reasons, because you can ensure that your invoice picks up all of the appropriate accounting elements that are tied to that contract. Again, it gets back into how quickly you want your invoice to be processed and managed. If you're managing your spend against the contracts, you'll be able to define exactly what the invoicing terms, right? So such as a build, test, deploy, so that you can ensure that when the supplier sends you an invoice against the contract, it's going to be for the correct amount at the particular milestone that you might have negotiated with that supplier. So from a buyer standpoint, one of the things that we start talking about with contracts is making sure that you're being contract compliant. When you start looking at all of the spend that you might have today, what you might be finding is a lot of it is not at the contracted amount that you have, but in fact, it's greater than that. So by tying your invoicing back to the contracts, you have greater control of your spend to make sure that it is going to be compliant within the contract.
Okay. I've got one more question for you, Dan. If I were to proceed with the supplier portal, who supports the suppliers with any questions or issues after I've enabled it?
So that's one of the wonderful things about this. So as we take a look at the deployment, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with an initial wave plan as to which suppliers do we need to speak to about full integration, because they take a little bit more work, and then getting the suppliers up and into the portal. Right, once the project ends, right, we get into two different things that can happen. One is accelerated. We're more than happy to take a look from a support standpoint to continue and enable your clients. One of the things that we say through an engagement such as this is the one piece of the project that never truly ends is the supplier enablement, because you're always going to be adding in new suppliers as other suppliers offboard. So you need to be able to support that. As you do that, and as suppliers have questions, because this is such a widely used network, SAP Ariba actually takes ownership of supporting the suppliers. So if the supplier has a question, after we've gone through the enablement, maybe it's been 2 or 3 months and they haven't submitted an invoice and they need a refresher, they have all kinds of online access, but they also have the ability to get in touch directly with Ariba to work with them, and Ariba will support those suppliers to get them re-educated on how to use the network as well.
Awesome. I want to start off by giving a big thanks to Sean, Dan, and Bob for joining us today for their presentation. That's all the questions I've received so far in the chat, unless there's any last-minute additions. If you do happen to have any questions that pop up after today's presentation, feel free to reach out to our team at the contact information provided in the invite. We welcome any feedback you may have from today's webcast, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webinar. And on behalf of Illumiti and Accelerated STP, I hope you all have a great day. Thank you, guys.